You've probably heard the same advice over and over again. Eat less, move more, create a calorie deficit, and according to the traditional calories in, calories out model, that should lead to fat loss. For decades, this idea has dominated fitness culture, nutrition advice, and public health messaging. The logic seems simple enough that it almost feels unquestionable. If your body burns more calories than it consumes, stored energy has to come from somewhere. And in theory, that energy comes primarily from body fat. So when people struggle to lose weight or regain weight after dieting, the conclusion often becomes deeply personal. People assume they failed because they lacked discipline, consistency, motivation. But modern obesity research increasingly suggests the situation is far more biologically complex than that explanation implies. Long-term outcomes tell a much more complicated story than the simplified calorie equation suggests. Research consistently shows that a large percentage of individuals who lose significant amounts of weight eventually regain a substantial portion of it. And importantly, this pattern appears repeatedly across many different dieting strategies: low-fat diets, low-carb diets, intermittent fasting, meal replacement plans, aggressive calorie restriction. The specific methods may differ, but long-term maintenance remains extremely difficult for many individuals. This is one reason obesity researchers increasingly focus not only on weight loss itself, but on the biological adaptations that occur after weight loss. Because losing weight and maintaining weight loss are not physiologically identical processes, the body often responds very differently to each. The calories in, calories out framework originates from the first law of thermodynamics. Energy cannot be created or destroyed. From a purely physical standpoint, this principle is absolutely correct. If energy expenditure exceeds energy intake, stored energy must eventually be used. But thermodynamics alone does not explain how the human body regulates energy balance, because the human body is not a static machine. It is an adaptive biological organism, constantly responding to internal and external conditions. The brain monitors energy availability continuously. Hormones adjust appetite and metabolism. Behavior changes subconsciously, and the body actively attempts to maintain stability through a process known as homeostasis. This means calorie restriction does not occur in isolation. The moment energy intake decreases, the body begins adapting in ways designed to preserve survival. One of the most important concepts in this discussion is adaptive thermogenesis. Adaptive thermogenesis refers to the reduction in energy expenditure that occurs during calorie restriction or weight loss. In simple terms, the body becomes more energy efficient when food availability decreases. This adaptation affects multiple systems simultaneously. Resting metabolic rate may decline, hormonal signaling changes, movement patterns shift, body temperature may decrease slightly, and the brain increases motivation to seek food. These adaptations are not signs that the laws of physics stopped working. They are examples of biology adjusting the equation itself. And this distinction is extremely important, because calories in and calories out are not fixed independent variables. Both are heavily regulated by physiology. The body adapts to calorie restriction through several overlapping mechanisms. One of the largest is a reduction in resting metabolic rate. Resting metabolic rate, or RMR, represents the energy required to sustain basic physiological functions: breathing, circulation, cellular repair, temperature regulation, neural activity. For most individuals, resting metabolism accounts for the majority of total daily energy expenditure. During prolonged calorie restriction, resting metabolic rate frequently decreases beyond what would normally be expected from body mass changes alone. In other words, the body becomes metabolically more efficient. This adaptation has been observed repeatedly in controlled research settings. One of the most widely discussed examples came from follow-up studies on contestants from The Biggest Loser. Researchers found that years after dramatic weight loss, many participants still exhibited suppressed metabolic rates relative to what would normally be predicted for their body size. This suggests metabolic adaptation may persist long after active dieting ends. The body adapts to calorie restriction through several overlapping mechanisms. One of the largest is a reduction in resting metabolic rate. Resting metabolic rate, or RMR, represents the energy required to sustain basic physiological functions: breathing, circulation, cellular repair, temperature regulation, neural activity. For most individuals, resting metabolism accounts for the majority of total daily energy expenditure. During prolonged calorie restriction, Resting metabolic rate frequently decreases beyond what would normally be expected from body mass changes alone. In other words, the body becomes metabolically more efficient. This adaptation has been observed repeatedly in controlled research settings. One of the most widely discussed examples came from follow-up studies on contestants from The Biggest Loser. Researchers found that years after dramatic weight loss, many participants still exhibited suppressed metabolic rates relative to what would normally be predicted for their body size. This suggests metabolic adaptation may persist long after active dieting ends. Another major adaptation involves non-exercise activity thermogenesis, commonly referred to as NEAT. NEAT includes all unconscious physical activity that is not deliberate exercise: standing, walking around the house, changing posture, fidgeting, hand movements, pacing. These movements may appear insignificant individually, but together they can account for several hundred calories of daily energy expenditure. Research shows NEAT varies dramatically between individuals and often decreases substantially during aggressive dieting. Importantly, these reductions are usually subconscious. People do not intentionally decide to move less. The body simply becomes more energy conservative automatically. Someone dieting aggressively may sit slightly longer, move slightly less frequently, reduce spontaneous activity without consciously noticing. Over weeks and months, these small behavioral adaptations can significantly reduce total energy expenditure. This is one reason predicted calorie deficits often fail to produce mathematically expected rates of fat loss. The body is continuously compensating. From an evolutionary perspective, these responses make perfect sense. For most of human history, rapid or sustained weight loss usually reflected reduced food availability. Humans evolved in environments where starvation represented a genuine survival threat. As a result, natural selection favored biological systems capable of conserving energy during scarcity. The human brain evolved to defend against weight loss far more aggressively than weight gain. And in modern food environments, those ancient survival systems still exist. The body does not recognize that calorie restriction may be intentional. It simply detects reduced energy availability, and it responds accordingly. This is one reason obesity research increasingly focuses on body weight regulation as a biologically defended process rather than a simple matter of conscious willpower. Hormonal regulation plays a major role in this process. One of the most important hormones involved is ghrelin. Ghrelin is produced primarily in the stomach and functions as a signal that stimulates appetite and food-seeking behavior. During calorie restriction, ghrelin levels generally increase. As ghrelin rises, hunger intensifies. Food becomes more rewarding. Cravings become stronger. Motivation to seek food increases. This is not merely psychological. It is a measurable physiological response. Research also suggests elevated ghrelin signaling may persist long after weight loss occurs. This means individuals who lose substantial amounts of weight may continue experiencing increased hunger even after reaching their goal weight. The body is actively attempting to restore lost energy reserves. At the same time, leptin levels typically decrease. Leptin is produced primarily by adipose tissue and functions as a long-term signal of energy sufficiency. When body fat decreases, leptin concentrations decline accordingly. Reduced leptin signaling affects multiple physiological systems simultaneously. Hunger increases, satiety decreases, energy expenditure may decline further, and the brain becomes more sensitive to food-related reward signals. The hypothalamus continuously integrates these hormonal signals in order to regulate energy balance. This means appetite regulation is deeply connected to physiology rather than conscious decision-making alone. The combination of elevated ghrelin and reduced leptin creates a biological environment that strongly favors weight regain following dieting. This helps explain why maintaining weight loss is physiologically difficult for many individuals. This is one reason simplistic narratives around willpower are increasingly viewed as incomplete within obesity research. Body weight regulation involves interactions between neurobiology, endocrinology, metabolism, behavior, sleep, stress physiology, genetics, and environment. The brain continuously monitors energy availability and adjusts behavior accordingly. Reward pathways become more sensitive during calorie restriction. Food cues become more difficult to ignore. Appetite signaling intensifies. At the same time, energy expenditure may decrease. This means the body is simultaneously increasing pressure to eat while reducing calorie output. Understanding this does not eliminate personal responsibility, but it does provide a more biologically accurate framework for understanding long-term weight regulation. Another major limitation of simplistic calorie models is the assumption that all calories produce identical biological effects. They do not. While calories represent units of energy, foods differ dramatically in how they influence digestion, satiety, hormonal response, thermogenesis, and metabolic regulation. For example, protein-rich foods generally increase satiety more effectively than highly refined carbohydrates. Protein also has a significantly higher thermic effect of food. This means the body expends more energy digesting and metabolizing protein compared to dietary fat or refined carbohydrates. Fiber-rich foods also slow digestion and improve satiety. Whole, minimally processed foods tend to produce more stable blood glucose responses and slower absorption rates. In contrast, highly refined carbohydrates are often absorbed rapidly, producing larger fluctuations in blood glucose and insulin signaling. Ultra-processed foods introduce an additional layer of complexity. Many modern processed foods are engineered specifically for hyperpalatability. They combine refined carbohydrates, fats, sodium, flavor compounds, and texture optimization in ways that maximize reward signaling while minimizing satiety. These foods are often easy to consume quickly and difficult to regulate intuitively. Research from controlled feeding studies demonstrates that individuals consuming ultra-processed diets frequently consume significantly more calories than individuals consuming minimally processed diets, even when meals are matched for macronutrients. This suggests food quality influences passive overconsumption independently of conscious intent. In other words, the structure of the food environment itself may strongly influence energy intake behavior. Food quality may also influence the gut microbiome. The gut microbiome consists of trillions of microorganisms involved in digestion, immune regulation, inflammation, and metabolic signaling. Emerging evidence suggests dietary patterns affect microbial diversity and metabolic health over time. Although this field remains complex and rapidly evolving, diets dominated by highly processed foods may negatively influence microbial composition and inflammatory regulation. The microbiome also appears connected to insulin sensitivity, nutrient metabolism, appetite signaling, and energy extraction from food. This means body weight regulation is influenced not only by calorie quantity, but also by the biological effects foods produce throughout multiple physiological systems. Exercise introduces another important variable. Traditional calorie models often assume that calories burned during exercise directly increase total energy expenditure in a predictable linear manner. However, research increasingly suggests the body frequently compensates for increased activity. As exercise volume rises, appetite may increase, spontaneous movement may decrease elsewhere, recovery demands increase, and energy may be redirected away from other physiological systems. This concept is sometimes referred to as constrained energy expenditure. Research from evolutionary anthropologist Herman Poncer suggests total daily energy expenditure may be more tightly regulated than previously assumed. In this model, the body behaves more like an energy budget system. As expenditure increases in one area, the body may compensate through reductions elsewhere. This compensation may involve reductions in spontaneous movement, alterations in reproductive hormone signaling, reduced immune activity, or other metabolic adjustments. This does not mean exercise is ineffective, but it does mean the relationship between exercise and body weight is more biologically complex than simple calorie equations imply. Exercise remains profoundly beneficial for overall health. It improves cardiovascular function, insulin sensitivity, mitochondrial density, cognitive performance, mood regulation, endothelial function, and long-term mortality risk. Resistance training is especially important during fat loss because it helps preserve lean body mass. Maintaining muscle tissue is metabolically advantageous because lean mass contributes substantially to resting energy expenditure and glucose disposal. Exercise therefore remains essential for long-term metabolic health, even if calorie burn alone does not fully explain body composition outcomes. Taken together, these mechanisms demonstrate that calories in, calories out is best understood as a foundational thermodynamic principle rather than a complete physiological model of body weight regulation. Energy balance still matters, but both sides of the equation, energy intake and energy expenditure, are biologically regulated variables. The body continuously adjusts hunger, satiety, metabolism, movement, and energy allocation in response to changing conditions. This is why sustainable fat loss strategies increasingly emphasize long-term metabolic health rather than aggressive short-term restriction. Modern evidence-based approaches to body composition typically prioritize several key principles: higher protein intake, resistance training, adequate sleep, stress management, greater consumption of minimally processed foods, and moderate sustainable calorie deficits rather than extreme restriction. Sleep itself plays a critical role in appetite regulation and insulin sensitivity. Research shows inadequate sleep alters ghrelin signaling, impairs glucose regulation, increases food reward sensitivity, and elevates cravings for energy-dense foods. Stress physiology also affects body weight regulation through cortisol signaling and behavioral changes related to appetite and reward. These systems are interconnected. For this reason, smaller sustainable deficits often outperform aggressive dieting strategies over the long term. Moderate calorie restriction tends to produce less severe hormonal adaptation, less metabolic slowdown, and greater long-term adherence. The goal is not simply rapid weight reduction. The goal is improving metabolic health while minimizing the compensatory adaptations that increase the likelihood of weight regain. Long-term consistency generally matters more than short-term intensity. The calories in, calories out model was never entirely wrong. The laws of thermodynamics still apply, but human metabolism is governed by biology layered on top of those physical principles. Hormones regulate hunger. The brain regulates reward signaling and behavior. Metabolism adapts to energy availability. Sleep and stress alter appetite and insulin sensitivity. Food quality influences satiety, digestion, inflammation, and microbiome health. And genetics influence susceptibility to obesity-promoting environments. Modern obesity research increasingly recognizes that body weight regulation is multifactorial. No single variable fully explains long-term body composition outcomes. Effective interventions generally require addressing multiple physiological and behavioral systems simultaneously. This is one reason simplistic explanations often fail to capture the complexity of human metabolism. The equation itself is real, but the biology regulating that equation is extraordinarily dynamic. Calories in, calories out remains a foundational principle of energy balance, but the systems regulating those calories are far more sophisticated than the traditional model alone suggests. And understanding that complexity may be one of the most important steps toward developing more effective, evidence-based, and sustainable approaches to long-term metabolic health and body composition regulation.